The air in the conference room is thick, heavy with unspoken accusations and the stale scent of fear. It clings to the expensive wood table, to the hushed breaths of the men in suits across from him, and to the sudden, sickening sweat blooming on his upper lip. He's talking, his voice tight, a desperate, slick performance I've seen variations of for years, but this time the audience isn't me. This time, the audience holds the leash. I sit slightly behind him, a silent, passive observer in this drama he never knew I was directing. The lead banker, a woman with eyes like chipped ice, holds a thin file. It looks innocuous, like any other financial summary, but I know the weight it carries. I know the brittle threads of lies within it, and I know the single, devastating truth I helped weave into its pages. He gestures wildly, trying to spin this latest downturn as a temporary blip, a market fluctuation, something easily managed with a little flexibility, a little faith. But his eyes, darting everywhere but directly at the banker, betray him. He's unraveling, thread by thread, and the silence that follows his plea is the loudest sound in the room. If you're watching this, maybe you've felt a gut punch like that. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know to share these stories. Our life, before, it felt solid, like a well-built house on firm ground. He was the ambitious businessman, sharp suits, sharper mind, building an empire, brick by careful brick. I was the supportive wife, the quiet strength, managing our home, tending my garden, and watching my own investments grow steadily, legacy stocks my grandmother had left me, a quiet pool of security that felt untouchable, separate from the exhilarating, terrifying risks of his world. He built his company from nothing, they said. A real self-made man. He worked late, of course. Early mornings, late nights, weekends sometimes. That was the price of success, we told ourselves. The price of the beautiful house, the quiet luxury, the feeling of arriving somewhere important. We had a rhythm, a comfortable dance of separate orbits that occasionally intersected for dinner, for a movie night, for shared silence over coffee. There was affection, yes. Habit, certainly. A deep, unquestioned assumption that we were partners, moving in the same direction, building a future together. My stocks were my safety net, my quiet contribution, tucked away in a portfolio I rarely touched, watched over by a financial advisor my grandmother had trusted, a man I trusted. They grew, year after year, slow and steady, the opposite of my husband's high-stakes world. They were mine, unequivocally. Separate property, established long before we met. A fact we both understood. A fact that felt like a cornerstone of our shared stability. I remember looking at the quarterly statements, seeing the numbers climb, feeling a quiet sense of peace. This was for us. For our future. For a rainy day that would surely never come. Or so I thought. The first crack was small, almost imperceptible. A statement from my brokerage account, showing a transaction I didn't recognize. Not a sale, but some kind of reclassification, a change in how the assets were held. It was technical jargon, something about being held in a margin account. I called my advisor, Mr. Henderson, a man whose voice was as steady and calm as a deep lake. He sounded hesitant, unusual for him. He explained carefully that a portion of the stocks had been moved, used in a way that suggested they were backing something else. Collateral. The word itself felt cold, like a stone dropped into my stomach. Collateral for what? He couldn't say directly, citing privacy agreements, but he implied it was connected to my husband's business, a standard procedure, he reassured me, for expanding credit lines. Standard? Using my separate assets? Without asking me? A chill went down my spine. My husband had always been meticulous about our separate finances, a point of pride for him, maintaining clear boundaries. He'd never touched these stocks, never even suggested it. I asked him that night, casually, trying to keep my voice light. He was tired, slumped on the sofa, loosened tie. "Oh, that," he mumbled, not meeting my eyes. "Just a formality with the bank. Helps with the new expansion funding. Makes the balance sheet look stronger. Totally standard. Nothing to worry about." He waved a dismissive hand. already turning back to the news on the screen. It felt like a door slammed shut. The unease lingered, a faint, sour taste in my mouth. Standard? Using my inheritance without even mentioning it? It wasn't the act itself that bothered me as much as the secrecy. The casual dismissal. The formality didn't stop there. Over the next few months, more statements arrived. More jargon. Larger portions of my portfolio being moved, reclassified, tied up. The numbers, once a source of peace, now felt like a ticking clock. Mr. Henderson's calls became more frequent, his voice less steady, more strained. He spoke in veiled terms about aggressive leveraging, increased risk exposure, and diversification concerns that now felt impossible due to the concentration of my assets backing whatever my husband was doing. My husband remained evasive.
Busy. Stressed.
He'd snap if I pushed too hard, accusing me of not trusting him, of undermining his work. "Do you want this lifestyle or not?" He'd ask, his voice sharp, weaponized. Trust me. I know what I'm doing. I wanted to trust him. I tried to. But the knot in my stomach tightened with each passing week. His hours got longer, if that was even possible. He was distant when he was home, preoccupied, irritable. His phone was glued to his hand, screen down. He started taking calls in the other room, whispering. Little things adding up. The secrecy wasn't just about my stocks anymore. It felt like a wall rising between us, built of hushed conversations and locked screens. I started noticing new names appearing on his phone bill, unfamiliar numbers. Frequent calls to the same few numbers at odd hours. A woman's name appeared repeatedly, tucked away in his contacts under an innocuous initial. He said it was a new client, a tricky one, required a lot of hand-holding. He'd always been a good liar, I just hadn't known it until then. The full horror began to unfold not through a bank statement, but through a simple image. A picture sent to my phone, anonymously. It was a grand opening, ribbon cutting, champagne. And standing proudly, scissor in hand, next to my husband, was a woman. Young, vibrant, smiling like she owned the world. The photo was clearly taken inside a boutique. Fashionable clothes on racks, chic decor. The caption below the picture read, "So thrilled for woman's name and the launch of her dream boutique. A huge thanks to my incredible investor and partner, husband's name, investor and partner." The words hit me like a physical blow. Partner. Not just a client. Not just a tricky account. The photo caption included the boutique's name. I typed it into my browser, my hands shaking. Up came the website, the social media pages. More photos. Photos of my husband, always just slightly out of frame in the official shots, but clearly visible in the tagged photos. Laughing with her. Touching her arm. Looking at her the way he used to look at me a long, long time ago. And there, buried deep in the About Us section on the website, was a small line. Funded with generous support from husband's company name. Generous support. My stomach twisted. His company's name. The company whose credit line was being aggressively leveraged using my stocks as collateral. It wasn't just infidelity. It was a financial betrayal, a scheme built on my foundation. He wasn't just risking his future. He was risking mine. He was building her dream with my inheritance. The air left my lungs. The world tilted. That wasn't a tricky client, that was the truth. And the truth was uglier, colder, and far more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just a mistress. It was a mistress funded by my money, used as leverage for his business, which now seemed inextricably linked to hers. The house wasn't just shaky, it was built on sand, and the tide was coming in. The realization changed everything. The polite questions stopped. The hurt morphed into something colder, sharper. I wasn't just a betrayed wife. I was a woman whose financial security, painstakingly built and preserved, was being gambled away on a mistress's vanity project by a man who clearly saw me as little more than a convenient vault. I stopped trying to talk to him. There was nothing to say. He was a stranger, a thief in my own home. I started talking to others. Not about the affair. That felt strangely secondary now, a symptom of a deeper rot. I talked to lawyers, financial forensics experts, I dug into every document I could find. His company statements, my brokerage statements, bank records. The paper trail was there if you knew how to look. And I learned how to look. His standard procedure of using my stocks wasn't standard at all. It was a deliberate, calculated move to get around lending limits, to access capital he couldn't get otherwise, to fund something the bank wouldn't touch on its own merits. And it was all tied together. His company's health, the boutique's funding, the loans, and my stocks, the anchor holding the precarious structure in place. I saw the connections, the web of deceit he'd woven. He thought he was so clever, so untouchable. He thought I was naive, trusting. He thought I wouldn't look, wouldn't understand. He was wrong. The more I dug, the clearer it became. The boutique wasn't thriving. It was struggling, draining resources. His company, stretched thin providing generous support, was starting to buckle under the strain. The aggressive leveraging, the risky investments he'd made elsewhere to try and prop things up, fueled by my collateral. It was all starting to unravel. The bank, I learned, was getting nervous. The terms of the loan agreements were strict. Covenants were being breached. They were looking for a reason. Any reason. My stocks, his lifeline, were also his greatest vulnerability. And I knew exactly how to make that vulnerability his undoing. I wasn't planning revenge in the traditional sense. I was planning survival. Protecting myself. Protecting what was rightfully mine. And if his world had to burn for mine to be safe, then I would strike the match. The air in the house grew thin. Every interaction was a performance. He acted the part of the stressed but capable businessman, occasionally throwing me a bone of strained affection. I played the role of the oblivious wife, perhaps a little concerned, but ultimately trusting. We moved through the motions, a grotesque parody of a marriage, each of us holding secrets, each watching the other. He didn't know I knew about the boutique, about her. He certainly didn't know I understood the intricate, illicit dance of debt and collateral he'd orchestrated using my money. He thought he was just managing a difficult patch, that he'd eventually sort it out, pay off the loans, release my stocks, and I'd never be the wiser. He underestimated me in the most fundamental way. He saw me as an extension of his comfortable life, not an independent entity with my own resources, my own mind, my own will. The bank calls became more frequent, more insistent. I could hear the tension in his voice when he spoke to them. He started snapping at his employees, pacing the floors late at night. The facade was cracking, and he knew it. He just didn't know who was doing the cracking. I continued my work quietly, gathering documents, building my case, consulting with my legal team. They were initially skeptical about the ease with which he'd apparently used my separate assets, until I showed them the paper trail, the deliberate misrepresentations, the outright fraud involved in structuring the deals. It was all there in black and white. His signature, his instructions, tying my untouchable stocks to his increasingly unstable ventures and her failing business. The stakes were terrifyingly high. If his company went under, if the loans defaulted, the bank would seize my assets. Everything my grandmother had worked for, everything I had quietly nurtured, would be gone. Lost to his recklessness and his mistress. That thought fueled me. It hardened me. There was no room for sentimentality. Only survival. The turning point wasn't a single dramatic moment, but a cold, calculated decision made in the quiet hours of the night. I was sitting alone in the living room, the house silent, a stack of financial documents spread out before me. The numbers swam before my eyes, a complex web of debt and assets, lies and truth. I saw the approaching deadline. The bank was losing patience. They were demanding more information, more assurance. They were circling. My lawyer had laid out the options. I could wait, hope he somehow pulled a rabbit out of a hat, which seemed increasingly unlikely. I could try to negotiate with the bank myself, prove my assets were used fraudulently, but that would be a long, messy, uncertain legal battle, potentially tying up my money for years. Or I could accelerate the inevitable on my terms. I had information the bank didn't have, information that would solidify their case for calling the loans immediately. Proof of misrepresentation, of covenants deliberately breached, of assets being diverted to prop up unrelated, failing ventures, the boutique, while the main business faltered. Information that would make them act, not eventually but now. It was a dangerous game. It meant deliberately triggering the collapse of his world. It meant facing the full force of his downfall head-on. But it was the cleanest path, the fastest path, to securing my own position. By providing the bank with undeniable proof of the fraud tied to the collateral, my collateral, I could simultaneously help them seize his assets and potentially prove my own assets were wrongfully used, positioning myself to reclaim them from the wreckage before they were fully absorbed by the bank's demands. It was about timing, precision, using his own elaborate lies as the truth that brought him down. I picked up the phone. I called my lawyer. My voice was steady, devoid of emotion. "I'm ready," I said. "Tell me what I need to do." The day arrived like any other Tuesday. Sunny, deceptively normal. He left for work, kissing me goodbye, the usual peck on the cheek, oblivious to the storm gathering on the horizon. I went about my morning routine, a strange calm settling over me. The information had been delivered the day before, a carefully compiled package of documents, untraceable digital breadcrumbs, delivered to the right people at the bank. Anonymous, but undeniable. Proof of what he had done, how he had done it, and how unstable his position truly was. It wasn't just his company's finances at stake. It was the foundation of the loans themselves, built on a fraudulent premise using my collateral. The banker, with eyes like ice, would see it.
Her team would see it.
And their internal calculus, already leaning towards action, would shift decisively. I spent the morning in my garden, pruning roses, the thorns sharp against my gloves. It was a physical activity, grounding me, keeping my hands busy while my mind raced. Every rustle of leaves sounded like a whisper, every distant siren like an alarm. I knew the call could come at any moment. The call that would change everything. He was at his office, preparing for what he thought was just another tense meeting with the bank, another round of cajoling, explaining, promising. He didn't know the meeting was a formality, a prelude to execution. He didn't know the ground had already been cut out from under him, not by market forces or bad luck, but by the quiet hand he had so carelessly betrayed. The call came mid-afternoon. Not to me.
To him.
I wasn't there, not in the room, but I had arranged for someone to be. A source within his company, someone he'd wronged, someone loyal to me, who owed me a favor. They texted me when the bank representatives arrived. They texted me when the meeting began. And then, the text I was waiting for. The banker is speaking.
She sounds
final. Then came the description of the moment I'd orchestrated. The banker, not engaging with his usual smooth talk, but reading from a prepared statement, announcing that due to confirmed breaches of loan covenants, material misrepresentations in securing the loans, and the exposure of fraudulently used collateral, the bank was calling all outstanding loans, effective immediately. His company's assets were being seized to satisfy the debt. His accounts frozen. Control transferred. It was over.
just like that.
The
source described his face. The color draining from it. The way he started to speak, to protest, and then the words catching in his throat. The silence that followed. And then the sound he made. Not a cry, not a shout. A strangled, animal sound of utter, blindsided defeat. He hadn't just lost his company. He'd lost the game. He didn't know he was playing against me. He'd walked into the room thinking he might talk his way out of trouble, maybe lose a little, but survive. He didn't know I'd handed the bank the rope, tied the knot, and kicked the stool. He collapsed. Not dramatically, like in movies. My source said he just crumpled, like a marionette whose strings were suddenly cut. Fell forward onto the table, knocking papers everywhere, just stayed there, a heap of expensive suit and broken ambition. He was blindsided. He thought his cunning had protected him, his lies a shield. He never imagined the person he'd betrayed most deeply would be the one to quietly, precisely, dismantle everything. The boutique, of course, went down with him. It was inextricably tied to his company's funding, the loans it relied on. When his world collapsed, hers vanished too. He lost his company, his fortune, his mistress, and the future he thought he was building with her, all in an instant. And it happened because I chose the moment, chose the method, using the very evidence of his deceit to bring him down. It wasn't karma, it was cold, deliberate action. The house felt different that evening. Quieter. Emptier. He didn't come home. He couldn't. The bank security escorted him from the premises. The news hit the business, wires quickly. Stunning collapse of a prominent local firm. Speculation was rampant, but the details were sparse. Only I knew the full story, the intricate dance of betrayal and countermove. My lawyers were already working, using the bank's decisive action and the proof of fraudulent use of my assets to argue for their release. The path was clear now. Messy, yes, but clear. My assets would likely be returned, clawed back from the edge of the abyss he'd pushed them towards. I had survived. I had protected myself. I had won in a way. But sitting there in the quiet house, the victory felt hollow, coated in the ash of what had been. The man I married was gone, replaced by a stranger capable of profound deceit. The life we built was shattered. There was no triumphant feeling, no elation. Just a cold, heavy silence. I had faced the storm he created and navigated through it, but the landscape was forever changed. The roses in the garden still had thorns. The security was back, the future was mine to rebuild, but the cost was everything else. If you've ever had to make an impossible choice to protect yourself, I'd love to hear your version in the comments below. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these stories to life.